Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming, and Matt especially, thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Uh, and for those who aren't familiar with Eggland's Best is the largest branded egg company in the U.S. And as you can imagine, it's been an interesting time over the last year and a half or so. There were some challenges going on within the industry. There have been challenges, for example, that are going on with pricing and price increases, with inventory challenges, and then probably as a result of a lot of that, I would imagine consumer changes and consumer preferences as well. So what were your goals going into this period of disruption?
Yeah, I think what this year highlighted for us was the need to build resiliency in the way we understand our consumers. For a long time, egg prices existed within fairly narrow bands. Coming out of COVID, we've seen really nothing but change from the evolution of stay at home to stay at home orders and everyone baking their banana breads and learning all the new hobbies of food you were going to make to 2022, the outbreak of avian influenza that drove prices up to an oversupply in 23. And then at the start of this year, really the worst avian influenza that we've dealt with as a brand. For consumers, that means in certain parts of the country, we drop off the shelf entirely, or in other parts, we pull back promotions or prices would rise. And the folks that we could count on coming to shelf, seeing that white carton and that Eggland's Best red roundel, they weren't going to either see it, or when they saw it, they might be frustrated by the price it was available at. We needed to think about how to find those loyalists so we could reactivate them, maintain contact with folks without antagonizing them because they couldn't get the product or were frustrated by the price, and then start building the scaffolding of what getting back to growth would look like so that we could deal with what is ultimately probably a more turbulent market of eggs, at least for the near future, and have the right resilient flywheel to help us with growth.
It's amazing. And one of the challenges I think within CPG and Eggland's in general is often getting data can be difficult. So you have to rely upon other data sources to be able to identify what are some of those trends. So one of the things that we've seen and we partnered with you on is to identify what are some of those customer behaviors. What are those differences between best customers, which you can see here in those top deciles, so those top 1 to 3 deciles, and see that shifting of behavior over time. So what the data was showing is that some of Eggland's best customers, you can see here, they were shifting and you were stealing share from private label as opposed to other brands as well. What are some of the other ways that you're leveraging data to be able to help kind of navigate some of these challenging times?
Yeah, absolutely. So a big part for us is understanding why folks come into the brand. We tend to meet folks as they kind of hit different seasons of life. Think about, if you have a family, when you first had a kid, you might have started thinking about what you were eating, what you were bringing into the home. We do well with older consumers. You've had your first, maybe less than fun GP visit where you're getting some advice on what you're eating and how you're planning to stay healthy and be well. We're usually trying to show up in those moments as a helping hand that's in the refrigerator there to help make that easier for your family. And so we're trying to find folks on those journeys in their lives, get them into the brand, hopefully, stay available, stay at a price that doesn't really nudge them out of their choices. And so we have to think about that on both sides. Really it's kind of like bumpers down at the bowling alley, that we need to have pricing and availability working for us, always having that uh, opportunity to build momentum and move folks through and keep people moving through the category without losing track of where the consumer will come in. And so it's a lot of reacting to the market we're competing in, where our consumer is in their lives and the choices that they're making so that we can be relevant, and then laddering that to hopefully growth and also importantly maintenance. Because the other thing we see, and really what the team's done a wonderful job working with us on, is understanding those buyer behaviors from a transient consumer who buys us on sale and we're happy to be in their fridge, but next week they might be back to another product, all the way to that consumer who, when they might be at shelf 30, 40 times a year, they're buying us 80% of those trips as long as we're available. And speaking to those consumers can be pretty different And finding the right moment to get in that fridge the first time to then drive that ongoing consumption. Really, you see that in the decile work we've done here, as well as the ways we try to keep growing in the future.
Right. And I know we're here, in general, to be able to talk about AI and talk about data and how that's really transforming businesses. And so part of what we've also done is help to identify, and you can see here within this graph, what are some of those changes in those customer behaviors. And one thing I thought was particularly interesting was that of those best customers, especially, you're seeing that they're taking fewer trips, but spending more.
Yep.
And so in some ways, it kind of like weeded out and it helped identify who are those price insensitive customers.
Yep.
As well. So what are some of those signals or leading indicators that you're really being able to use to help identify some of that personalization, some of those different topics that you just talked about before?
Yeah, the biggest part that we're looking for and trying to understand is that consumer that when we're in stock, we're going to be their first choice at shelf or in their preferred delivery app or however they're building that grocery list. We tend to think of our strategy as what I call a get on the list strategy. We know that most folks will still buy fresh food from a physical store, but about half might consider their next purchase as starting online, or they're using the retailer website to help them build the list or another tool. We're always trying to think about what are those right consumers who either we're their default option, we're their kind of go-to as a part of building that healthy lifestyle for the family, versus who are those consumers who can become that. And then on the other hand, who are folks who maybe come in and out of the brand based on circumstances? We saw that really kind of the volume turned up over the last year where we had regions of the country where we were genuinely out of stock because we had producers who had to depopulate their flocks or change the way they were coming to market. Then we had other parts of the country where prices came up and promotions dropped off. We see that in this view where we stayed in stock and where we were present, that most loyal consumer was willing to keep buying even at higher prices. But we often saw that more transient buyer switch to whatever the lower cost option was available or what was on deal or what they could get. And so parsing that was incredibly important to understand where are we finishing this year, but then how do we think about next year to get back in that basket, get on that list, and then make sure we're building that continuous buying behavior.
And one of the challenges that I've seen with regards to data and AI is how do you actually take those insights and make them actionable?
Yep.
How are you applying those? And what are some kind of tips that you can give everyone else for how to actually make some of these insights actionable?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's kind of one thing that's always been true in data-driven marketing. It's never or rarely perfect at a one-to-one basis, but you're often trying to find repeatable kind of engines of growth. What indicates that someone is in the category and making choices? Are there different moments that are making them more aware of why your product might matter? And then understanding too, what's the feedback cycle? In some ways, we're very fortunate because we get learnings fairly quickly because consumers are at their grocery store. They're placing an order every 1 to 2 weeks. So when we do something different, consumers are raising that hand to say, hey, I'm opting into this, or something has changed and I'm opting out. So we're able to dial that in and out fairly regularly, and we're getting that broad feedback. Most brands, you're kind of thinking about what's that cycle of learning that you can get into while balancing that with the environment you're competing in. We've turned both up to the extremes. Our product in the past year, it's varied wildly from, the example I use is if you were to buy a dozen eggs in Northern California in the Wayback Machine of the salad days of 18 months ago, at a mass retailer, they might have been $3 or $4 a dozen. In the early part of this year in Q1, that same egg would have been more than $1 per egg. And so you saw that wild swing. The environmental conditions matter a lot of how you're approaching that consumer while pairing it with where they are in their own circumstances and their own behaviors.
Amazing. And we've had, I think, a lot of learnings over this, and we were talking about right before this, about how this is going to impact that kind of strategy for next year, and being able to help prioritize what are a couple of the opportunities, right? And this really gets into how to turn these insights into action. So First, you mentioned before around having some key regions and seeing some regional differences.
Yep.
One of the things that I think is kind of interesting, that we were even just talking about, is that you can get insights and make and see the impact really quickly as well. So with regards to kind of regional differences in particular, how is that impacting your strategy for next year?
Yeah, absolutely. We know we kind of run the gamut from places where we remained in stock, maybe had pricing and promotion challenges, to certain parts of the country where if you were to walk into a grocery store in March, you'd have seen a fairly empty shelf in the egg set. We then had some spots where we were slower to recover than some of the commodity product or brands that we compete with because our birds eat a specialized feed, are separate from other flocks, and that's what lets us hit our nutrition claims, produce the product that we produce and that we have such confidence in. But it also meant that we had to recover in a longer path than maybe some of the folks that we were competing with. We're paying extra attention to those spots where we're seeing lapsed buyers, where the road to recovery is a lot more re-engagement and reminding consumers why they love the brand, why they had us on their list. In other regions, it's kind of rebuilding that presence of mind, that presence on the list. That tends to be a common theme, but how that'll live down in those different areas, the intensity that we might have to market at, and then reacting to conditions because we don't control pricing at the end of the day. Our retail partners are setting a lot of choices about what's available on shelf, how it's priced. We worked with the team on understanding some environmental, economic indicators where how is the consumer feeling more broadly. It's obviously been a up and down or turbulent year as different folks have approached, whether it's tariffs or other changes, how they come to shelf. You're making choices about the way you're shopping for groceries based on what else is going on in your life. We're trying to react to that. The regions of the country we're recovering in, understanding our own buyers' history, and all of that's combining to see how do we show up at that right time for the right consumer in the right moment.
Excellent. And two other points here that I want to cover for everyone else, and one topic in particular that comes up all the time when I talk to different clients, talk to different brands, is this notion of full funnel orchestration. So how to really do that transformation from looking at siloed individual channels to having a coordinated full funnel orchestration that's really data driven. How are you looking at that, and where do you see that going next year?
And that's been really a hallmark of our partnership with Zeta to grow from initially some tests in programmatic to adding pieces of social to some of our buys in CTV and OTT. We have a category where the consumer is coming back to shelf all the time. But we also have a category that is intended as a low average selling price item. We sell an egg that competes with commodities, so we're not exactly able to pay a lot to reacquire our own consumers all the time. So how those pieces fit together to stay on that list, to stay top of mind is incredibly important, particularly when you think about efficiency and costs to drive desired action and who you're talking to. So brands are often building backwards from how comfortable am I to re-incentivize a buyer who I think likes me? How do I get them to want to re-opt in? We have to balance that where ideally we're not always subsidizing a consumer's next purchase because that'll be tough to be profitable long term. But when we have a year like we just did, we have to do a lot of reintroduction with folks. And so we're piecing those components of the funnel, those tactics together to figure out the most efficient way to show up in a relevant, impactful unit online, whether that's an introduction in CTV with a follow-up on social or a different order that might make sense for a different consumer.
Great, and we have about a minute left. So the last topic I want to talk about is, and this to me is one of the more kind of fascinating CPG topics, is around occasion coverage. And I think this is an opportunity to create new KPIs of what share of occasion are you capturing, and and how you can use that for personalization. How are you looking at that for next year, and how are you applying that?
I think for us, we think of occasions in short-term occasions as well as seasons of life over time too. It's obviously the calendar of the year, whether that's New Year, New You, you're trying to get healthier, family meals together through some of the Q2 holidays to even barbecue season to back to school to the holidays. making sure that what we show consumers and where we show up makes sense to them, and our product is still a hero in whatever we're showing and in that moment, that helping hand, and you notice who that hand's attached to as the brand. But it's also the occasions of people's lives. You start a new job and you're building a new routine in the morning. You all of a sudden decide you're going to run the marathon, and you're looking for all the ways that might help make that slightly less painful for that first couple miles you have to figure out how to run, to you're welcoming a new child into the family and thinking about what you're eating. Occasions happen both personally as well as on the calendar, and we're trying to fit that together so that we're there for that consumer, and pairing that to that full channel orchestration in our portfolio, so that we pick one of our right items for you as the consumer in that right moment and in that place where you're paying attention without bugging you as a consumer.
Incredible. And I think that's our time here.
Okay.
I want to thank you again and look forward to our continued partnership. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dave.